Hello everybody and welcome to Toitū Curator's Corner episode number 40. My name's Sean Brosnan. I'm a curator at Otago Settlers Museum here in Dunedin. I've been telling these little stories about early life in the Otago settlement since the coronavirus lockdown began, just keeping them going. Now in the last episode I talked about the existence of an opposition group called the Little Enemy in pioneer Dunedin who sought to oppose the claims to dominance of the Free Church Scots and frustrate their ongoing claims to that control of events here in Dunedin after the collapse of the New Zealand Company and the Otago Association. Now this dynamic was very important in the early settlement because Otago, like all the New Zealand colonies, was still subject to direct rule from Britain through the person of the Queen's representative of New Zealand, the Governor. Now a New Zealand Constitution Act had been passed in 1846 setting up a political framework for limited self-government in the colonies. But George Grey, who was the governor from 1845 to 1853, had prevented it going into operation, suspending it for 5 years. The Otago settlers wanted the freedom to determine their own affairs, and they agitated ceaselessly for that right. And finally, in 1852, a new New Zealand Constitution Act was passed by the British Parliament. Clause 78 of that Act specifically recognised land rights in Otago, confirming titles for those who had purchased their land from the New Zealand Company. This was a massive relief for Otago's pioneer settlers, and it led to the biggest street party that pioneer Dunedin had ever had. Here's how James Barr recalled it in his 1879 History of Otago. Friday, the 5th of November 1852, as some may remember, was a gloomy, pouring, wet day. There was no one abroad. A solitary bullock despondently and leisurely drawing a sledge behind it brought out the dreary loneliness of the scene. Some few outdoor workmen, having nothing better to do, had congregated in the stores, but outside all was hushed, as if the town had gone to sleep until the clouds had emptied their contents. But about 3 o'clock, the news, with an effect as instantaneous as that of an electric shock, ran through the listless community that the Endeavour from Port Cooper had arrived, and with her, the positive announcement that the Act of Parliament granting a constitution to New Zealand had received the royal assent. Instantly, all inertness vanished. The first thought, of course, by way of celebration, was to blast the cannon on Bell Hill that was the town's sole piece of artillery. But it was quickly discovered that there was no gunpowder on hand. Undaunted, and despite the pouring rain, a bunch of volunteers set off down the harbour in a small boat to pick some up from Port Chalmers. Meanwhile, the bell atop Bell Hill was set ringing and colours run up the flagstaff. A bonfire was decided upon on the spur of the moment. Every bit of suitable fuel was then dragged out and onto Bell Hill. Cartloads of old cases, wood shavings, barrels, crates, all the rubbish behind people's houses, along the beach, and in every street hollow and dumping ground. So it would be, by chance, the settlement's biggest communal clean-up to date. The Victorian delight in light displays also came into play, illuminations as they called them. There was nothing fancy available in Dunedin, of course, but every candle was put into play and put into the houses, such that the whole town supply was threatened with being used up. But people said that they were prepared to grope about in darkness until the next street supply came, rather than give up this chance to celebrate by lighting up the town. And so they did. From about 7:30 p.m, one by one, every house in the colony set out its little candle lights, and pinpricks of light began to spot out all over town. Dunedin, usually black and dismal at night and not very safe to wander around, became a blaze of light. By now the rain had stopped too, and without a breath of wind it was a perfect night for a bonfire. So that as that was set alight atop Bell Hill, it flared up, and the effect was quite amazing because the water of the harbour at that stage still lapped right up around the base of the hill, and the glow of the flames reflected into the water and back onto the town created a striking effect that people remembered for long afterwards. 2 more bonfires were lit along Princes Street, and a fire balloon was set off into the air All in all, it was an amazing setting and something that people remembered forever because nothing like it had ever happened in the pioneer settlement before. It was a great night of celebration and everyone was in high spirits. Once the volunteers had returned from Port Chalmers with the gunpowder, the gun was blasted off and you could hear the crackle of small arms fire all round town too as people shot off their own guns. Barrels of tar were set alight and floating out into the harbour, and it added to the magical effect of light, flame everywhere and people dancing and singing for joy. A fiddler began to play, Scotch reels and dancing began too, but of course the muddy streets were no fit surface for dancing, so they quickly congregated on the town's jetty and they danced the night away. Although the uneven timbers there threatened their ankles, they were willing to give it a shot just to celebrate with joy this great occasion, the independence of Otago. But this important new freedom to choose Otago's political representatives was not available to everyone, of course. The franchise was, for a start, restricted to men, and only those who had certain property qualifications. And there was also a residency clause with 6 months minimum occupation to qualify for the vote. Now that was going to prove crucial in another controversy over the franchise that was shortly to blow up. But that is a story for another day. For now, let's just remember the 5th of November, 1852, Otago's Independence Day.